How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne and this is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. I'm a little fired up today because I just watched this video from Linus Tech Tips where he claims he killed the PS5 with a PC. Now, on paper, he did get pretty damn close to actually overtaking the PS5 for a PC built for similar prices. But when you dig into it, there are quite a few caveats that I think need to be taken account for. And also, I still think at the end of the day, the PS5 is overall the best value. Not even just a better value, the best value when you're looking into getting into gaming. I'm honestly kind of excited to talk about this video because I've mentioned it 1,000 times. My two main places I play video games right now are on my PS5 and on my gaming PC. My laptop is cutting edge as cutting edge gets. It's a Razer Blade 16, and the cool thing they did this generation of laptops is they basically just made them all thicker, because for a long time, like in the 30 series graphics card era, they were trying to make everything as thin as possible. So if you were buying a laptop with a 3080 Ti in it, you were really getting around 3060 or 3070 desktop grade performance because those graphics cards are running at lower wattage. So this generation, you're still getting a little bit of performance fall off, but the performance is much better across the board. So my 4090 laptop, instead of running at the level of like a 4060 or 4070, it basically runs at the level of a desktop 4080. It's pretty damn beefy. But even though my laptop runs circles around my PS5 on paper, I still pretty much default to my PS5 for the vast majority of games. I'll get into that more later in the video because I want to break down Linus's video, kind of go through the specs of his PC and all of the caveats that he kind of had to employ to reach the level he did. So right out of the gate, he spent $475. If you compare that to a disc-based PS5, that's about what you're going to spend on a brand new one. Right now, they're on sale for $400. You can get a bundle with a disc-based PS5 Slim that comes along with Spider-Man 2, but the MSRP, the normal price you're mostly going to pay, like 99% of the time, is $500. And unlike past generations, that price is not going to drop when the PS5 Pro comes out because parts aren't getting cheaper for Sony, right? Like in the past with the PS4 generation, they were already using underpowered tech right at the beginning of the generation because they held the console back for a little bit because of the recession that happened in around 2008. And then as time went on, the components got cheaper and cheaper. So you saw the price of the PS4 fall as low as, I'm pretty sure, like $250 brand new. That is most likely, like I think you could bet money on it, not going to happen this generation. So we'll call $500 the actual price of a PS5 if you want to buy it today. As for the parts he used, he got a decent motherboard for $40, an AMD Ryzen 5 5600X for $120. The thing I take the most problem with though is the GPU he got. He got the Intel Arc A770 for $200. He got a Samsung 970 Evo Plus 1TB NVMe for $40. His case was free. Who really cares about the case? But I know you have to factor it in price wise, so that's good to know it was free. His power supply was a Seasonic X650. I've never heard of this brand, but he was able to get it for $40, which is pretty cheap. And then finally, he got 16 gigs of RAM for $35. And all of this is on par or a little bit better performing than the PS5. I think he went a little bit more budget on the processor. I'm not sure if that processor is on par or a little less powerful than the PS5's, but GPU horsepower is what's really coming in handy here. Now, if you actually go watch the video, which I definitely recommend because it's a great video and seeing someone build a PC for this cheap is exciting to me, it is really cool that he's able to get the performance in the games he tests with this PC versus the PS5. And the games he tested are all great games on PlayStation. Most of them are exclusives that Sony either made with the second party or their first party studios. Doom Eternal is the only real outlier. Of course, that's owned by Microsoft now, but it was made by id Studios over at Bethesda. Other than that, he tested Death Stranding, God of War, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and The Last of Us Part 1. All great showcases on PC that all have various different issues that I'll talk about in a little bit. But for the most part, generally speaking, of course, these games all performed as good on PC, if not a little bit better, which is great, right? For $475 to be able to play next-gen games is awesome. Death Stranding is the director's cut. The Last of Us Part 1 is a full-on PS5 remake. God of War got a PS5 patch, but you're still essentially playing the PS4 version of that game. And I'm pretty sure Doom Eternal got a next-gen patch if it was released on last gen. Either way, that game runs incredibly well across a wide range of devices. If you play that game on Steam Deck, you can play it at basically ultra settings and get a locked 60 frames per second without even using FSR. So that game is just incredibly well optimized. But now let's get into the caveats and then my argument as to why the PS5 PS5 is still the better option. The first thing is he got a lot of these parts used. So obviously if you're buying things used, you can get pretty hefty discounts on these parts. I know some people are a little bit nervous about buying used PC parts. I've always been frugal. So when I build PCs, like back in the day, I had a desktop before I was gaming on laptops primarily. I would use used parts all the time. I would get them from my friends. I would buy them on Facebook Marketplace. I'd buy them on eBay. I never have in my life had a part fail outside of my old spinning disk hard drive that I used from like one PC all the way up to like 3 builds. So like that thing went through its paces, right? Like I really abused it, and that was the only new part, ironically, in my entire PC setup back in the day. But if you're buying used PC parts to build a PC that you're going to compete with the PS5 with, I think we should be comparing the price here to a used PS5. So right now, just doing a cursory look on GameStop, at least you can get a PS5 pre-owned and refurbished. I think they do some refurbishing, but I mean, if you watch my old employer Austin Evans videos, you probably know that when you buy things used from GameStop, that refurbished badge that they put on their consoles is more like a suggestion rather than a badge of quality. They've come back dusty, they've come back with broken parts, they've come back extremely scratched up. Like you're not really getting it refurbished. Anyway, the price that you'll pay is around $360 to $370, which is for a digital model for sure. But PCs, you don't use the disk drive to play games. So I don't really think anyone's buying physical games anymore. I'd say that 99 to 99.9% of people on PC are all digital, buying their games on Steam or getting them for free on the Epic Game Store. So I think it's fair to compare a digital PS5 to an all digital PC. You're saving $100 right there immediately. A little less than 100, but we'll just round up and say you're saving $100 by going pre-owned as well, just like Linus did when he was building this PC. But if you check eBay, if you check Facebook Marketplace, you can get disc-based PS5s for around $300 pretty much any day you want. Of course, it depends on where you're at in the United States. Back in LA, I'd see PS5s pop up all the time. Here in Detroit, I also see them pop up pretty frequently as well. And on average, you're going to pay from $300 to $350, right? Like if someone's listing a PS5 for $350, I mean, they're always going in with the assumption that they're not going to get $350 on Marketplace. There's always a game to play where you get down to a price that's fair for you, and you can get some pretty good deals that way. So just from a parts cost proposition alone, you're going to pay less for a PS5 if you put a little bit more work into it. And even if you're able to get that deal that's going on right now where a disc-based PS5 can be bought with Spider-Man 2 for $400, you got to take the price of Spider-Man 2 off of that bundle, and that would make it around $330 because Spider-Man 2 is a disc-based $70 full retail game. So just from a price comparison alone, the PS5 is ultimately a lot cheaper if you put in the same work to get it as Linus did, right? Like if he bought all these parts new, I'm sure this PC would have been closer to $800 or $1,000. So I'm not like really attacking him here. Honestly, I still think it's really cool. We just got to be fair when we're talking about the PS5. The next thing I take issues with is the raw frame output, right? Like, yes, the PS5, the max it can run games at is 120 FPS, but there's a reason for that, right? Like when you're playing a game on PC and you're getting frame rates of like 150, 160, all the way up to like 240 FPS, if you're not using VSync, the frame rate will be all over the place, because what VSync does is it basically caps your GPU and stops the game from running over your refresh rate of your monitor. So if your refresh rate of your monitor is 240 Hertz and you turn on VSync, it's going to cap the frame rate at 240 Hertz. But if you're someone who's using a 60 Hertz monitor and you use VSync, your frame rate's going to be capped at 60 frames per second. And honestly, if you're playing on PC and you want the best quality gameplay, VSync is something that I always recommend turning on just because it eliminates screen tearing. So the PS4 generation, we never saw screen tearing, right? Like most games had VSync enabled there all the time. There was never really any tearing. They were running at a pretty much lock 30. They could fall into the 20s, but because VSync was enabled, it drops the frames that would break the screen when you're turning the camera. So you never really see the screen tearing. If you're running a game without VSync on PC, yes, you will get a higher output frame rate, but it won't be dropping the frames that are in between that kind of cause screen tearing in the first place. So if you're using a 120 Hertz monitor and your game is running from like 100 to 120 FPS, when you turn the camera, the screen is going to tear. So theoretically, you would want to turn VSync on, which will cap the frame rate at 120, but you can also turn on 60 Hertz mode and cap the frame rate at 60 and eliminate VSync. So in most cases, you wouldn't even even be running the game at a higher frame rate to begin with, right? Like you want the best quality out of the game. This generation's a little bit weird because there are examples on the PlayStation 5 of games that have screen tearing. One that still has major tearing problems is Jedi Survivor. The 60 FPS mode is largely pretty good. When you go to the planet that's like a big western town, the main open world area, I forget what it's called. It might be Kobo or something like that. When you go there and you're in the open world, you'll see the frames drop when you get to the main town all the way down to 40 sometimes, but largely it's a mostly 60 FPS experience. But when you're in that town, when you're in big combat moments, when you're in big cutscenes that are all rendered in engine, you'll see the frame rate tearing, especially when you're turning the camera, or if you're locked onto a character and you run away from them and the camera whips around so that you can see the character you're locked onto, you will see screen tearing. There are other examples. I'm pretty sure Final Fantasy 16 in performance mode is another example of a game that has screen tearing, but for the most part, the vast majority of games on the PlayStation 5 are running at either a locked enough frame rate or with VSync enabled, so you'll never see screen tearing. So just because the PS5 caps out at 120, it really comes down to the fact that you're going to get a more fluid frame rate out of these games to begin with. Another thing they even point out in their video when they're talking about Death Stranding is that you get HDR on the PS5, which looks incredible if you've got an OLED TV or really any TV that can support HDR. It makes the color depth much better. It makes the blacks more black. It makes the whites more white. It just overall makes it a more lifelike, deep colored image that honestly looks better to my eye than when I'm not playing on HDR. I haven't not used HDR in a long time because my OLED monitor on my desk has HDR. My TV down here is an OLED with HDR. My TV upstairs is as well. I don't even have a TV in my house that doesn't have HDR anymore. It's a pretty standardized feature, but using the setup that Linus built, you're not really able to take advantage of HDR, which again is a little bit of a knock against that PC. The next caveat is 100% the graphics card they chose as well. I don't know if you have ever messed around with Intel graphics cards, but while they do have performance that's up to par and sometimes better than what you'd get from AMD or NVIDIA, they are still definitely lagging behind in terms of overall reliability and quality. When games come out that have problems on PC like Jedi Survivor, the cards that have the most problems are always without fail the Intel based GPUs. Now that's mostly because Intel is kind of new to the GPU game and a lot of developers are looking at the Steam hardware surveys and saying, well, the vast minority of people are using Intel graphics cards, so we're not really going to optimize for that. But there have been examples where you'd be playing a game like I think Starfield recently, and AMD cards, because they had a partnership with AMD, would run the game like 10 to 20% better. But if you compare that to like the Intel based cards, you'd be seeing an even bigger gulf in terms of performance. So knowing that they're using an Intel based card, that's going to cause a lot of headaches if they actually use this PC as a daily driver. And speaking of stuttering, that's something that I think people really need to be aware of if they're ever considering switching completely to PC from PS5. Stuttering is an absolute plague on PC, mainly because so many games are using Unreal Engine 4 and Unreal Engine 5. It comes down to shader caching. When you start a game up on PC, I'm just going to keep saying Jedi Survivor because it's my most recent messed up PC port example. You'll see a screen that says optimizing shaders every time you start the game. It's downloading the shaders, it's optimizing them, it's putting them on your GPU. So when you get to that point in the game, when the shader activates for the first time, you won't see a 1-second stutter. But whether you're talking Jedi Survivor, you're talking Dead Space, you're talking RoboCop Rogue City, pretty much any game out there right now that uses Unreal Engine, the shader optimization that happens at the beginning of the game almost 100% of the time misses shaders. So a lot of the time when you're playing these games, the first time through, you'll see 1-second stutters the first time any animation happens. Now, if you go through that and play the game a second time, you won't see any of those stutters, but I'd argue that having it happen for your entire first playthrough is unacceptable and just honestly stupid. And then if you upgrade your graphics card drivers, which every NVIDIA graphics card I've had gets a new driver update pretty much twice a month at the lowest, they get one about once a month. Once you update the drivers, it clears out the shader cache completely. So if you go back to these games where you already have the shaders cached and play them again, you'll have to recache them, so you'll see that stuttering all over the place. all over the place, all over the place. And then you also have to consider that a lot of these games that are running worse on PlayStation 5, it's not because of the PlayStation 5's underpowered hardware, it's because the games are unoptimized to begin with. So a great example of this is Dead Space. Dead Space runs incredible on PS5. It's a pretty much locked 60 FPS across the board, but when you go into new rooms, you open doors, you're traversing to different parts of the ship, there is traversal stutter in that game. But because of how the PS5 outputs frames or handles stuttering, it's dramatically less noticeable on the PlayStation 5 than it is on PC. Like I mentioned, my PC's got a 4090 in it. It's got a top of the line CPU. It's got 16 gigs of RAM. It's great. It's an absolute powerhouse. But if I go to the same spot in Dead Space as I am on PS5 and walk through a door, whereas on PS5, it's a smoothed out sort of frame drop that you see, on PC, it's a hard stutter that literally stops the game up to 5 seconds at a time, and nothing breaks immersion like traversal stuttering. So if you're playing an Unreal Engine game on PC exclusively and you're not playing anything on PS5, you're going to have to live with stutter. Now, a lot of people, if you go on the Steam forums when a game you notice it's stuttering, they'll say it's running fine on my rig. It's not running fine on their rig. It's 100% a problem across the board. They're just not trained to see it. And thankfully, for those people, they'll never kind of notice it. Hopefully they don't look up videos, because once you see it, it really is a curse that you can never lift off of yourself. But once you notice stuttering, I promise you it's something that's extremely hard to just accept and play. And then taking that point one step further, because the problem is game optimization, yes, you're going to be running the game better on PC in a lot of cases, like output frame rate is going to be better. But if there's a problem with the underlying game that's causing it to run at like 28 to 35 FPS on PS5, you're going to have the exact same problems on PC. Pacific Drive is the most recent example. That game, performance-wise, is abysmal. There's stuttering all over the place. There's traversal stutter. There's major frame drops. It all seems to be caused by shadows. So when you go play that game on PS5, the graphic settings are turned down dramatically. But because that game's running, I think at like 4K 30 FPS, it runs definitely worse on PS5, but the problems are pretty much exactly the same. So your options aren't really run the game really well on PC and run it like shit on PS5. It's like running it like shit on PS5 or running it like fart on a PC. I don't know, like it's still not running correctly on PC at the end of the day. It's not like you could just brute force your way through these problems. And then the next thing I think is worth bringing up here that I never hear PC gamers talk about is that with these cinematic games like Ratchet & Clank, like God of War, like The Last of Us Part 1, even Doom Eternal, but I still think that game plays best on PC because playing shooters with a controller after you've adapted to mouse and keyboard is basically impossible. The best way to play these games is sitting back on your couch in front of a nice big TV with a nice soundbar or a nice pair of headphones. Like, I love my LG monitor. It's an OLED monitor. It's 1440p. It looks great when I'm playing Helldivers 2, but in my mind, there is a clear delineation line between games I will play on PC and games I will play on PS5, and that delineation line is whether or not I want to play it on my couch. But yeah, I just thought it'd be fun to talk about this today here on PSReady. No hate to Linus or anything. I honestly think the video is really cool. You should go watch the whole thing because it is sweet seeing games running right next to a PS5 on a PC that cost less MSRP wise than a PlayStation 5. And I don't know, I don't think it's that serious. It's just a YouTube video and it's just video games. But yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.